Welcome everyone to another edition of the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord Q&A. We are here with Eric Brown from a whole bunch of websites, but from highexistence.com and edgeofbeing.org and a few more. So we'll get into all that. And Eric, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. This has been really beautiful. I'm super excited.
So you've had a couple really great talks with John Vervaeke on his Voices with Vervaeke, where the focus was on John and his work, and those are some great conversations, and I recommend everyone go and listen to them on John's YouTube. But I think people will be interested to hear about you and all the work that you're doing. So tell us a little bit about yourself. What was your journey? What brought you to this point?
Sure. And I love these open-ended questions are always fantastic. The story I have often told is right out of school. Like I went to school my entire life wanting to do some sort of marketing in the tech world. That was like the North Star for me. And I emerged from school, got into the kind of tech startup world, and it came it came to a point where I felt like we were getting ahead of ourselves. And what I mean by that is I was starting to recognize that you could have the best tools available, but if you're giving really powerful technology to grown-up children, we're still going to run up against all the problems that we have been and are currently running up against. And so that was actually really largely destabilizing for me. It was really difficult to come to face that, my little chance at contributing and saving the world was not going to happen because tech was not the answer to that. Um, it seemed, and it still in many ways seems to me that there's actually a starting point before the tools and the tech, which is the maturity of the people, right? You need a whole sovereign collective to be able to make good decisions, to be able to use the tools effectively so that you can then actually go and build a beautiful future. And so, yeah, the past few years have been very much focused on finding the avenues, outlets, and opportunities to contribute to the growth of people, particularly in this, what I think we've lost in the process to becoming a full adult, right? We've lost the rite of passage. We've lost the communities and adult populations mirroring that back in people. And so I've really just been putting feelers out to find those avenues.
So I like that
Um,
phrase, adult children. Uh, how do you get adults to grow up?
awesome, awesome. To me, it seems like a two-step process, and both of these things are actually we had it solved for a long time in the very kind of traditional indigenous rite of passage because it served to do two things. The first was it prompted an internal identity transformation where the individual goes through something really challenging, something really significant, something really profound in their lives, and they actually can look back on that as a defining transitional moment, right? The classic like hero's journey, the classic narrative arcs of all the good Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter stuff. Like you actually look back and are like, I'm no longer a child anymore. So there's an internal shift, but something I don't see a lot of people talking about as well is there was also a second important part of that where if if the individual returned to the community successfully from that great trial, the community actually also treated them like an adult. And having that like mirrored back social identity, um, in addition and in complement to the internal transformation, I think really just solidifies for the entire collective like, all right, this person is a whole member of society. They're ready to contribute. They're ready to actually move beyond themselves and be a necessary part of this culture and this commons. And yeah, I think we have almost entirely in like modern Western culture moved away from that or forgotten them completely. I think the only thing that comes even close is like the Jewish bar mitzvah, but even that I think is largely performative rather than having any felt like significance to the individual. And so yeah, a lot of people I think are in this this no man's land state right now of like, can I take responsibility? Do I have to wait for permission to do things? It's all you get a lot of the older generation still looking down at, what should be like fully capable adults still as like younger childish generations. And I think it is the stemming point. I think it's where a lot of the I would actually argue I think it's where a lot of our critical problems and crises stem from.
Maybe today's version of the trials you go through is to become depressed, go through therapy, and try to come out intact from the other end.
Yeah, and I'm sorry if you can catch some dogs. I'm currently in Mexico and they have some wild dogs down here. But
No worries.
yeah, and like this is I think you're correct, and I think that's a really important point of just almost everything that we have as like these signals are largely like hollow. They're largely empty in some ways. And it just doesn't I don't think it causes that shift in the individual, and it definitely doesn't suffice to cause that shift in the collective where they're actually like, oh, okay, this person is ready to take their seat at the table.
So is that how you would identify the meaning crisis, or what does the meaning crisis mean to you?
Uh, it's definitely a contributing. It's definitely a contributing factor. Um, Humans are very much narrative creatures. Like we're very story driven, and there this absence of a unifying or even just a cohesive story of what the heck you're actually doing here. I think I would put up as the meaning crisis. Um, in the second video I did with John, I also looped in some of Jamie Wheel's work, and he just put out another fantastic book called Recapture the Rapture, and I think he sums it up really nicely. He talks about meaning 1.0 as organized religion, right? Authority through the church, and for several, I think, very good reasons, that position of authority, the ability of the church to dictate like cohesive narrative and meaning, has been largely lost. And then there was meaning two, which was like kind of modern liberalism. Everyone's going to get the best of everything, which, as we see more and more and more, is also just not the case in largely any way. Like massive inequalities across the board, and so we've lost just the two epic pillars that were supposed to give this like unifying narrative to life itself, and most certainly to all of our individual lives. And like if this is even in Alice in Wonderland, like the Cheshire Cat, he's like, look, if you don't know where you're going, any direction will take you there. Right? Like if we don't have a unifying narrative, if we don't have a source of meaning, like nothing in your life will matter. Like literally nothing at all will have any felt significance for you. And I think all of us in so many different ways now are just wrestling with that. Like, how do I actually create my own meaning? Because it's most certainly not coming from any reputable external authority right now.
So, we traditionally we've had the religions which have had their various narratives. How do you think we get a new narrative, or are you thinking of resurrecting old narratives? How do you think we get there? How do we get to this narrative that joins us together?
Conversation. I think like John and I spoke in the first one and the second one. This is largely what I think was most captivating to me about John's work, which is the established organized religions seem largely incapable. Yeah, I would say incapable and also unwilling to actually step up to that task of like, I don't think they have the feedback loop. They don't have the adaptability to actually reclaim that stake as a source of meaning. And the reason I kind of joked around conversation is like, at the end of the day, the stories we tell are up to us, right? Like the things you agree to, the way you come to shared sense making is just a completely collective process. This is also one of the things that the rite of passage did, is like, it at least lets you get your emotions under control, because Yeah, when we're talking about things of existential importance to you and the sacredness of your entire life, like it's a very sensitive topic for people. But until we can actually even sit down in a circle and start hashing through some of this stuff of like, what would a compelling narrative be? What are sources of meaning? More particularly, what are practices where we can actually feel this as a lived experience? This is another thing about I guess, the problem of organized religion is that just through such like increasing layers of dogma, like people don't actually get a direct embodied experience of the transcendent anymore. They don't actually feel that there's something more beautiful that they're a part of going on, and they feel like this small isolated individual. So this is where, again, I think John and like Jordan Hall and a lot of the guys in this space are doing really beautiful work around what does redesigning the religion that's not a religion look like? Like, how do we get sources of meaning? How do we collectively cohere around them? And how do we bring on the ecologies of practices that actually let us steward those, let us initiate new people into them? Like, these are like the essential questions and essential problems. And it's easy to look at, like, another thing that comes up in this space a lot is the meta crisis. And it's like, look, it's actually all of those things, maybe a bit idealistically, I think will be sorted out if we sort out just this individual meaning and fundamental disconnection that we feel. If you can fix that, like, there's no person who feels connected to, like, deeply connected to themselves, others in the world, that would continue to allow just the rampant bullshit that happens today to continue happening. But that has to happen at a collective level for us to start getting some of this stuff together.
Yeah, I think those questions you raised are a lot of the questions that we talk about quite a bit on here in our in trying to figure out what the religion that's not a religion, could look like, and we've got a bunch of people who are talking a lot about that, and we used to have some meetings that we're going to be resurrecting soon, where we're meeting once a week to talk about that. One idea I've had that I'd like to try to get going on the server as well is to, get the writers and the artists, and to start writing songs, to writing poems, to writing stories, and seeing what we can do to maybe craft new narratives, knowing that they're narratives. Can we craft modern day myths, maybe collectively or together, or by drawing on the brain trust of all the people who are interested in this journey. It's I don't know if it'll work, but it's something I think it's worth trying.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There's another part of this where it, if you can take it as an assumption that our global society and culture is made up of strong, sovereign, composed individuals, there's actually an argument to be made where we don't actually need a single, like, unifying, coherent narrative. I think everyone on an individual scale definitely needs that in your life. Like, what is your entire existence doing here? Like, you need an answer for that, or suffering abounds beyond that point. But it's not actually apparent that if everyone had those individual ones and was comfortable, like, rooted in themselves, and didn't feel the need to have everyone else agree with it, everyone could have their own individual grand story and still come together as a collective. Because, damn, largely ooh, I want to be sensitive with what I say here. Any life affirming narrative that you tell yourself will include the health and wellness of everyone around you. And if they have a different story that makes them calm, happy, and healthy, like, good for them. That's fantastic. And then, this is where John and I kick things off. Like, in the early days, a religion is really just a group of people coming together and being like, yo, I've got this kind of cool story. I've been doing these practices around this thing. Like, what do you think? And then you just share notes. You start developing practices together. You write them down because, man, maybe other people would like to hear about it. And you've got right there, like, the basis of a religion. It's just a matter of, like, size and real estate that separates the small, like, cults of holistic worship from organized religion. So yeah, I think, like, you definitely need one on the individual level. And damn, it's almost like a virtuous survival of the fittest, to see how they grow.
Right, so you don't see the need to have one identical narrative, one common narrative, to help people grow up, to help people, become into themselves. Uh, People can have different narratives and reach similar goals. Is that what you're? Am I reading you right?
Yeah, I mean, like, so there are a few parts to this. Like one thing I think, rather than the narrative itself, I think there would need to be like fundamental agreements on like ethics or moral behavior, right? Something to that end. But like, I'm not a I'm not a Jainist, but Jains have an immense amount of overlapping, uh, like ethics and codes as I do, right? Try to do as little harm as possible to people, but entirely different stories, and I I believe like just entirely different metaphysics. Like we don't even agree on the nature of reality, but our conduct to ourselves, others in the world still ends up looking very similar on the surface. And the flip side of that is, the need or the requirement for everyone to believe your story has been the basis of almost every major religious war atrocity of all time, just because it's like, look at the non-believers, let's go do something about that. So it's actually I think it is that need for a single story causes a lot of problems. It's kind of like music, right? Like, you can have your preferred genre, right? It's yeah, it's more of an individual source of meaning than anything else.
Yeah, it's yeah. I'm always there's the question of the concern of dogma, and I think allowing for multiple narratives, I think is personally is healthy. I think once we start saying there's one narrative, I think that's when you go into the dangerous waters, and that's where the religions often have gotten into trouble at times by saying this is the narrative, and there's no other way but this way.
Yeah, and this is exactly why I love the movement forming around designing the religion that's not a religion, because there are these fundamental components that, man, almost just by the nature of like perpetuating organized religion just emerge all the time, and this like increasing dogma over time, right? Kind of removal or slow erosion of the actual embodied experience of God, like those fade over time, and those are like the essential. Those are what religions should be providing, and the third part of that is just like the lack of flexibility, adaptability, making room for the emergent, right? Because we're in fundamentally different times than every major religious story right now. Like there has to be an element of evolution in like baked into the DNA of whatever communal religious mythological stories we start telling, because they have to grow and shift as fast as we grow and shift.
Well, I'd like to come to evolution in a minute, but Perseus has a question. Isn't it all about Isn't it about a general socio-cultural environment in all its complexity and over time, rather than some specific act or ritual, or set thereof, that would make the difference? Wouldn't having some defined acts be the same superficial, dogmatic, performative approach to solving the problem that we currently have always had, and which leads to all the problems?
Damn, that was beautifully written. And I would, yeah, just completely, single-handedly, fully agree with that. Like, yeah, acting, acting like you have the answer, like you have the one ring of power, is just, it's a problem. It is the fundamental problem. Um, and that's why, yeah, this is also why the ecology of practices, I think, is so good, because it's actually this dynamic process of what are the fundamental needs right now. Like, is the story that we're telling serving the people? Yes or no? Can we change something about that? Can we find different practices to enact it? Oh, there are like other communities we want to interact with. Do we have a way of like holistic discussion, heart-centered discussion there? So I do believe it's this kind of like Lego blocks that can continually just be remixed, right? It's if we're trying to, yeah, maybe there's a different way to say it. The more you're trying to solidify and regiment something, you're probably getting further away from the thing that we need. The thing that we need has to be, it has to have power, but it still has to be loose and fluid and able to evolve as quickly as the people in the community need it to.
Yeah, I agree completely. So you mentioned evolution, and you've got a website, highexistence.com, where evolution is a pretty big theme there. Tell us about highexistence.com and how it came about, and what is it all about?
Yeah, so High Existence has been a decade-long kind of media outlet thus far, largely focused on kind of being an asset or an ally for people embarking on their own spiritual journey. Um, it didn't necessarily come as a response to this, but I mean, a decade ago, you got some pretty weird looks if you told people you were meditating, or like reading Buddhism, or stewarding your own psychedelic therapy sessions. Like, you got some really weird looks, and yet, the people, like, and still do, quite frankly, like, people felt a need for this, right? There was meaning breaking down. They were feeling super depressed, unimpressed with the story or the actions of the cultures that we were living in. And so, yeah, High Existence has been just a hub and a community for just exploring personal evolution, consciousness, psychology, philosophy, just trying to, again, create spaces for people to come together. Very similar to this. I mean, it just started as one founder in his dorm room starting to write some articles that he cared about, and it just grew over time. We have a pretty good sized audience right now, and we've been slowly, the focus in the past few years has really been on bringing direct experiences back. The blogs are nice, but they're entirely inhuman. You might get some forums and stuff, but it just doesn't compare to seeing people, speaking with people, giving people hugs. And so, pre-COVID, and I think we're starting to look at this again more seriously now, but we've started doing retreats, so week-long transformational retreats, and we've started doing, I guess you would call them like digital mastermind or digital incubators, like a big 8-week experience for people to largely focused on creating something or trying to find an income and fund your life in a way that feels a little more in alignment with yourself. So it is just it's been a home for the black sheep, I think, for a long time. And that's still the ethos we try to provide. Our audience is often on the younger end of the spectrum. And again, it's this, we have lost the rite of passage, right? And there is even if it's not obvious immediately, like, there are these subtle signals that's actually necessary, and people seek it out. And so just putting up articles, right, talking about this stuff can be extremely helpful for people, because they're probably not getting that help from their culture, their families, or whatever religion they currently ascribe to.
And the name High Existence is that a reference to psychedelics as well, or is it just?
It's a bit of both. It's a bit of both. Yeah, it's kind of a double entendre. So yeah, there is no small part of us that shies away from the fact that we feel that the intentional use of psychedelic sacraments can be extremely important and significant in people's lives. They can very much facilitate a kind of rite of passage in people, a very profound process of, dying, being reborn, of feeling connected to the greater web of life. Like, there are significant things, and I think they've often been a part of ancient rites of passage for good reason, and like were weaved into the cultures for good reason. The other half of it is also just almost a pointing at, like, what a game to play, right? Like, how far can you go? Like, how big can you evolve? What can you actually make of your life? So combining the two of those things of just, it's really been an aim for just personal evolution right? Seeing how big you can do and seeing what you can do in the world.
And would you say it takes a secular approach, or is there a metaphysical approach that the site comes from?
Yeah, this is also why I was so excited to talk to John a bit. I would say we're firmly, and our audience has firmly been in the camp of like the spiritual but not religious group.
Right. Right.
We don't necessarily, I think all of us on the team, actually, even all of us on the team right now would probably say different things about how we view uh, the nature of reality and the nature of being, but we try not to force that on anyone. Again, it's really just a kind of holding space for people so they can figure that stuff out on their own, right? Not just trying to give them resources like books, ideas, techniques, so that they can piece some of this stuff together. Um, but yeah, like a lot of my conversations, both of those two with John were largely they came from like my exposure to this audience, my exposure to my own just path and process and frustration and lack of support. And so then we're like, we on the team now are just kind of in the process of what did I wish I had like 10 years ago? And can we just deliver that to people?
It sounds like there's a lot of overlap between what you're doing and what we've been trying to do here. And yeah, my own journey was discovering John's series and finding, a big, finding that it provided a path that I hadn't known I wanted before. And this whole Discord is about all of us on the journey together, trying to figure it out together in this on this path. So that's great.
Yeah, I gotta say, I mentioned this to you like before the call, but again, like this entire Discord is absolutely fucking amazing. Like one of the points that we're at right now is like we still don't know exactly how to dial all this stuff in. Like this is still very much in the theoretical, starting to inch into the practiced and the practical. And so honestly, all I say to a lot of people right now is like we need good faith experiments being done. Like try to do your research, try to get the Lego blocks that you can build with, but man, start building things, right? It's so easy to get stuck in the like theoretical perfectionist trap where until I figured it all out in my head, I can't do anything. But honestly, you learn and experience at such a massive pace when you actually go out and engage in the world and try to build these things. And so yeah, I've been super impressed with this entire the genesis and the evolution of this Discord, man. So huge props. It is, again, we need 10,000 of these things right now.
Yeah, well, thank you, and it's the members of this Discord who have really, pushed things forward. So it's just a group effort, and it's so great. Andre, one of our moderators and members who has been great on this Discord, has a question for you. Go ahead, Andre.
Thanks, Brett. Hi, Eric. It's lovely to meet you, and I've been checking out your site, and I'm going to dig into it a lot later. So, I think the way you answered the question so far has been really beautiful, and you phrase what you want to say quite with good articulation, and I really appreciate that, being a writer myself. So I don't have a specific question. I just sort of have a bit of a insight and observation I've made in like the last few minutes, thinking about what I would ask, and maybe you could speak to some of that. So I've found when we look at something like the meaning crisis, if we look through philosophy in the last 2,000, 3,000 years, I think we find we've gone from the what to then going to the how and then to the why. So in ancient Greek philosophy, we had like, what does it mean to be like a man? What does it mean to have a soul? What is a soul? And then we go to medieval philosophy, and around that time, it's like, how do we enact with our spirit? How do we engage with ethical situations? And then in the 18th, 19th, 20th century, you have things like existentialism and nihilism. It's like, why does all this matter? Like, why am I here? Why are we doing these things? And as we head towards all these people gathering around together through COVID, the why has become very important for people, and they've started engaging with it a lot more. But I do find, especially as you were saying before, the practical and the practice, they were heading towards the how again. I think, in that, how do we solve this thing? Like, what do we do? Like, what's the method and the process? Um, through the ecology of practices, like engaging with meditation, actually doing something and doing the thing, rather than thinking, why is this good for me? Like, why should I do it? We just do it, and through the doing, we become into our being. And I think for any practical application and way of attacking this meaning crisis, we still need the why, but we more importantly need the how, and also the how do we band together to help each other through this journey we call life. So again, this is like very open ended, but maybe you could speak to one of the things I mentioned, and yeah, go from there. Thanks for listening.
Damn, dude, that was fantastic. That was really solid, and I do largely agree. One of the things that one of the things that came up for me right off the bat is like when you are in survival mode constantly, like you don't necessarily mess around. You don't think of like why do I exist? What is the purpose of my life? Like you are locked in the mode. And so actually like as humans what would you say, started conquering nature, like started not dying as rapidly, right? The bigger and bigger existential problems started coming up. Actually, quite frankly, like you almost, particularly at this day and age, you can almost take your pick, right? It's like, which kind of problem do you want to deal with? You can deal with the very particular local ones, or you can deal with the very lofty, heady ones. Um, and Western culture is firmly rooted, is very comfortable. Things are very safe, on whole. So yeah, we are now as a at least a Western, if not a global culture, like just going through the why is this happening at all? Why do I feel things? What is my experience at all? What am I supposed to do with it? So the why part, like again, I think it's a starting point. I think you're correct that it's actually the thing that we got to collectively last, but I think it's actually the thing that any individual person needs to reconcile first. Like why get out of bed? Period. Like why just wake up? Why do anything? Um and yeah, I feel like I'm barking on the rite of passage stuff a bit, but like that is not something that can be answered for you externally. People can point you in a direction, they can say what's worked for them, but until you feel it and you actually believe what you're saying, it just doesn't matter. And yeah, now we are at a point where hopefully people are starting to answer the why for themselves in some way, but particularly if your why is around like this is a gift. Existence is beautiful. It's actually a wonderful thing, and I want to take advantage of it, and I want to love people. Then it does get now into the what are we going to do, because there's a looming and already in motion meta crisis unfolding. Like civil discourse is taking just is a dumpster fire, right? The climate crisis, like there's a lot of really serious things going. And that actually in and of itself can be a why for people. Like life in and of itself is good enough to that I would want it to keep going. And yeah, I think we're very much at figuring out the new mechanics of this stuff now. I think you're super spot on in that. Like, okay, well, what does that mean? Like, what do we actually need to do? What do we need to address first? This is where I think the sense maker space, and yeah, I think John fits into that too. Like, how do we actually make sense of priority levels? And then how do we decide on what to do? Like, yeah, we are getting into the very nitty gritty of like, how do you midwife a global civilizational collapse into something, quite frankly, something at all? How do we get out of this? But how do we ensure that what comes out on the other side is at least a step in the direction of a more beautiful world? And yeah, I think stuff like this is why we need like 10,000 of these communities and experiments and psychotechs. Like, find the things that are better than what we have, surface them as high up the stack of civilization as we can, like get people using them, and like let's start actually designing culture, designing civilization that, damn, at least doesn't self-destruct, but if it can do that, like contribute to the flourishing and well-being of everything. It's a big task, but I mean, if you were all great movies always have the hero coming through like in the last moment on his last breath, right? And we're setting that stage for ourselves as a collective here.
Did you have a follow up, Andre?
Totally agree with everything you said. Yeah. You answered that like perfectly. I agree pretty much everything you mentioned there, and especially that we start off with like the why, and we have to get through that to get to the how for ourselves. And I mean, I've dealt with this quite a lot in my life because I've battled through severe depression, and with that sort of thing, you have to get over a speed hump of the why in order to actually do any what or how. And even though you may be going through all these sensations where the what is actually quite important, like, well, what is this thing? And we're given a label for it, and we're given symptoms, but the somatic sensations and the even the noetic sensations, you just can't identify with them quite readily enough. And now you put that on a global scale, especially through something like the pandemic, and everyone is still saying like the what, like what is this pandemic? I don't understand it. Like, it's this invisible virus that I can't see. And then the why springs up, and through communities like this, as you're saying, and many others, we guide each other through the how. Like, how can we get through this? What do we need to do? Why is it important? And I think it is, if we come together globally and work on our self-transformations, as well as guiding each other through collective group transformations, and hold aloft a goal of just becoming better as humanity and better people ourselves, if only to entertain the thought that we can transform the world in even a tiny way, then that is at least something. But I think all those tiny steps over time becomes like grains of sand on the beach. Like, we're all a single grain, and we feel like we might not amount to much, but when we group together, we turn into like the most beautiful beach that you could see, with the waves of the ocean lapping across it, and those waves are the sort of collective group unconscious, which is just malleable and meeting us as the sun sets. So that's my final note of what I have to say, and thank you for answering my question. You did very beautifully, so thank you for that, Eric, and it was nice to talk to you.
Dude, of course, thank you. And you sparked you hit it. One of the things that I think drives me the most right now is like, we're making the case of how quite frankly desperately we need the like what's and the hows. Like, we need to actually be playing the game, doing the thing of redesigning this stuff right now. But if you use the metaphor of like a round table where people are having a discussion, and you have one guy sitting there who's just like, oh, fuck this, I don't want to be here, this is stupid, you guys are all stupid, I hate this, I want to leave, right? That in no way helps anything. Or like, if someone gets any level of feedback on their idea and they're just like, oh, well, fuck you, you don't know what you're doing, like, I don't care, like they get overwhelmed or angry. All of these are non-starters, and this is definitely my hobby horse, at least on this call, of like the rite of passage and actually making like mature, capable adults who at the very least, like can handle their emotions, recognize that they have impact, and can show up for at least some level of like civil discourse. Because damn, we should already, like, right now, yesterday, 10 years ago, we should already be playing the game of rebuilding a lot of this stuff. But damn, we can barely sit down at the table and talk, and like we're still fucking around on color of skin and gender and shit. Like, no, we need to grow past that. And I do think a large part of that is, again, the culture that people are raised in and that process of deep maturity through through the ecology of practices of a culture, through the like intense rite of passage. Like there are some, this is also like my frustration with the tech world. It's like the tools do not matter if the people are fucking around with them and just cannot wield them effectively. Like it's almost with reluctance, but also this like deep urgency of like, okay, we got to sort the people out. Like we really got to get strong, capable, sovereign humans so that they can come and build a strong, capable, sovereign collective.
Yeah, I found that interesting looking at your site. So you've got. It sounds like you're looking at for a balance between the collective and the individual. How do you balance? Where do you find the balance there in what you're advocating for?
Yeah, yeah, and I do think like much like anything, like you just can't separate these things in isolation, right? The collective always informs you, and are a you cannot remove yourself from the collective either, despite how hard I think many of us try, right? We all just try to stay in our little box, like don't touch me, don't talk to me, just leave me alone. The the way it lives for me right now is just it's largely a capacity thing. And I think there's almost I would almost use sovereignty and capacity as like almost synonymous here is like can I stand strong in myself? Like can I support myself? It's like the airline metaphor, right? If a plane's going down, you got to put your own oxygen mask first. Like get my shit sorted out so that I can actually show up and be like a really capable part of the human team. But like once this is also where I guess modern culture has gone a little bit wayside is that there's no clear sense of like what is enough for the individual. Like no individual feels safe anymore, and so we accumulate all these things and hoard all of our money, and like it's all extremely self-centered up until the day you die. And actually, again, I think this is something that the rite of passage or the ecologies of practices do, which is like, oh, I see what is enough for me. I see what I need to have a happy, strong, flourishing life. And it's actually never that much. It's like good people, it's kind of Maslow's hierarchy, right? Which is actually not the process of a lifetime. It's like a very quick process. Like come into yourself and then come play this even bigger game with bigger stakes with the whole team. And I think that transition of, okay, it's time for me to actually enter the ring with my team that we're just missing. It's almost like the shadow side of highly individualistic cultures. Just like, well, a culture is inherently collective, and if everyone just only serves themselves, we run up into a lot of problems. And like all of this, like the ecology of practices, like it's not like you get to a point where you're completely one and done. Like, okay, I'm strong and capable for the rest of my life. Like it's fluid, it's dynamic. You might recognize places you're still getting triggered, places you have some trauma, some healing you need to do, some just unfortunate things that happen in your life. So it is this dance of like, okay, am I strong? Am I rooted? And can I go back into the ring now? And yeah, I think I answered that not quite as personal as the original question was, but that is largely how I think of it for me. Like, get strong, go back into the ring.
That's great. And what you just said raises a question I wanted to ask. So a few days ago, you wrote a tweet where you wrote, "Pulling no punches with this one. A winding tale exploring. 1. Why you need to die, ASAP. 2. The fatal mistake of Maslow's hierarchy. 3. The utility of ritual death, rebirth practices. And 4. How to unlock yourself and join the infinite game." And I think you wrote about this on your website, edgeofbeing.org. So maybe tell us about that tweet, what's behind it, and maybe tell us about your new website as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually just funny on how this timing of the conversation worked out, because yeah, I've just started rolling out some personal like newsletter slash essays, just because there's a bunch of shit I want to write about that I need to get off my chest, and I just wanted a little outlet and a platform to do that. So I put that first piece out, and like it is a full like 10-minute article that people can read, but I can probably address. I think I've spoken to many of them throughout this call, but like let's see if we can hit this in order. So the Maslow's hierarchy thing is the image that almost every textbook uses has self-actualization, the actualized capable individual at the peak, but is largely incomplete. Like there was a last level that he had that like I'm pretty sure he died before it got published, which was self-transcendence, like actually moving above yourself as the main focus of your life. And that I do think is just a fatal, absolutely fatal error on our part. And I go to talk about like there was a culture, an indigenous culture that influenced a lot of his hierarchy work, and it was the Blackfoot culture in Canada. And they have a pyramid that was originally for them it was a teepee, but it only has 3 levels, and on the foundation of it, like literally the very bottom, is the actualized individual. It is the capable individual. The middle level is the actualized culture, the actualized collective, and then the very tip of it is cultural perpetuity, right? Does this thing actually sustain over time? And I love this so much just because like we've got the whole thing backwards. Like we as a modern society take the actualized individual as like the main aim of life, and B as the process of a lifetime, which it should not be. Like it should be something that we systematically sort through really quickly. And again, this loops back into the rite of passage, right? And the 2 things that it provides. It provides the individual that felt sense of, okay, I'm different now. Like I'm actually willing to take on increasing levels of responsibility outside of myself. And it also does that thing in the collective where they actually accept that, recognize that, and give more responsibility to that person. And so the kind of tongue-in-cheek, but I'm actually quite serious about it, the thing of why you need to die, like of course it's not a physical death, but largely the rite of passage, and even just in practices in ancient cultures, were like quite literally death and rebirth practices. That was like one of the mainstays of a rite of passage. It was a very intense, either through like fasting or sensory deprivation or really intense psychedelic experiences. It was a psychosomatic, it was a death of the ego, right? The death of the small self. And those are the things that usher in those moments, like quite frankly, the mystical transcendent experience of, holy shit, there's something way bigger than me. It's extremely beautiful. I'm a part of it and I can't ever be separate from it. I'm actually never going to die because the thing that I am is not this small thing. Like I am the sum total of all of this. And actually the real opportunity is in being an individual person as part of a collective and in service to it. And so like that would be, because again, we talked earlier about the rampant just nihilism, suicide, depression going on. And a lot of that is driven from separation, isolation. I'm completely alone in this void and black universe, and when I die, I'm going to be snuffed out for all eternity. And which is just, again, now we're getting into personal metaphysics stuff, but like I would firmly say like that's just not true. Like you're not the separate self that dies upon the death of like the one physical body you have. Like it's actually the physical body, your experience of a single life, that is the really beautiful gift. And then once you've recognized that, well, then you come into and join the collective of the infinite game. How can we architect culture that lets as many of these experiences happen for as long as possible? Right? That is straight up the infinite game. That is like the religion that's not a religion. That is like the North Star. That is also, I think, one of the secular narratives that could be like the basis of an entire new religion, of just you're an infinite player playing an infinite game, do no harm, like make it as awesome for as many people as possible for as long as possible.
And do you think that's do you think that's plausible in today's world? Do you see a path to that?
Yeah, I do. Well, yeah, because this is actually going to be a follow up post I have from that, which is actual like techniques and practices you can do for like these like yeah quite literally death practices. And again, I would definitely give a huge shout out to Jamie Wheel's Recapture the Rapture book, because he goes into a few of these as well. Like, and there are kind of increasing levels of intensity that you can go on this. If you actually do a really intense, like 90-minute yoga session and you lie down, like the last pose in yoga is called corpse pose, Shavasana. It's called that for a reason, because you can actually get states where you no longer feel confined to being a thing inside of your head. That's the aim, right? You are much, much, much bigger than that, much stronger than just this individual unit. And then, yeah, you can go just increasingly up the stack. You know, there's sensory deprivation, there's like holotropic breath work. And then, yeah, you know, for me, bar none, the most significant experiences I've had have been extremely sacred and extremely intense psychedelic ceremonies across the board, where you just, this is actually a quote I used from Pema Chodron in that article of like, actually in ripping yourself apart over and over again, that's the only time you come to realize that you are indestructible. Like, you are just absolutely indestructible. And if you can get rid of that fear, that core fear of death, of the infinite blackness in front of you, and you just remove that, like you can reach a level of just raw freedom in the day-to-day experience that I think is extremely beautiful. It's something I would wish for everyone, but also it makes your needs as an individual a lot smaller, because you don't need to support anything. You don't need to scaffold your ego, because you're not scared of losing it anymore. And you can very readily, willingly show up at the table and be like, okay, I'm here. Here's part of the group. Let's do this. And yeah, like there are movements right now around, you know, I think psychedelic therapy is starting to get more spotlight. You know, the world of retreats is opening up so that you can actually go to cultures that do this. I think it will continue in that way. And there are a lot of things like vision quests, like camping, like fasting, a lot of things that can actually still get you to that same point. And yeah, I would argue that that's one of the building blocks of like a new religion or an infinite culture of just these initiatory practices where you have the felt sense like that. I keep coming back to that because it's super important, because you can scoff the idea as like the cliche, like, oh, we're all one, everything is connected. Like, it just sounds super trite, but until that like is a feeling in your bones, that is what we need, like the systematic ritual ways to get people to that experience as quickly as possible.
Well, and speaking of which, so you have another site. You've got a lot of sites called Phoenix Culture, and so tell us a bit about that.
So this is super like leading edge for me right now. I have one more post this weekend for the Edge of Being around actually this, like architecting culture, and then next week I'm actually going to be doing the public announcement of this thing. Yeah, so let's see if I can do this. Of course, the I love the archetype of the phoenix, right? I think it's literally everything that we just spoke about, right? It's largely associated with bursting into flames and from the ashes being reborn anew, which I think is what we need on, again, every step up the ladder, right? We need individual like phoenix movements. We need socio-cultural phoenix movements, and we just need like global civilizational phoenix movements, because damn, the things that we have set up right now are going on a bad trajectory, like end game for everyone type trajectory, and that's not cool. So we need this actual intentional, like, burn it down and build it back up. It can be a slower transition, but I still just love the metaphor. And so what I want it to do is two things. One is I want it to open up or help steward or help promote the individual process that we've talked about on so much of this, of actually quickly coming into maturity in, yeah, like moving beyond yourself and having you be the sole focus of your life and really showing up so that you can become an architect of culture, so that you can actually start playing with the tools and techniques and ideas that do that. So there's an individual component, and the collective component, I hope, is to actually just collab and synthesize with, man, even Discords like this, like with a bunch of amazing projects, start actually testing and iterating and enacting the collective practices we need to start figuring some of this shit out. Because it's really easy to sit and just be like, well, someone else will figure this out. But what if everyone says that? And so, actually, I would love, I have written a big ass, like, Google Doc. It's actually on the Phoenix Culture homepage that I think your community would, A, love, but I would also love for them to rip it apart. Because, you know, I'm just a dude sitting in a room sometimes, dreaming up a lot of this stuff, and yeah, I've been called to start actually putting it far more into practice. But I mean, yeah, the getting feedback on it would be amazing.
Oh, sure. Is
So
that
it's,
the Magnus Opus?
Yeah, yeah,
Oh, great.
yeah,
I will. I'll post a link to that after this.
yeah. Like something else here. Oh yeah, like John and I in one of our discussions talked about, and I do still love this, the notion of stealing the culture, right? How we actually have to take it back from whoever. There are a lot of groups, there are a lot of people who have largely stolen the culture and the collective zeitgeist right now. And you know, I do like the audacity of stealing it, but like the is actually something we talked about in the call as well. Like I have a kind of bone to pick with the angry activist archetype, because it's always defining itself as what you're doing sucks, you're wrong, you're stupid, like stop doing it. But it never advocates instead for like what the solution is or what the more beautiful option is. And like when you define yourself entirely by a negative, you end up just in this empty void, and you still need the next step there. And so the play with the Phoenix culture stuff is, well, let's actually build one that has such a gravitational pull to it because it's amazing that people just want to do it. Right? This is kind of like what Tesla's doing right now, right? Just making electric vehicles so freaking dope that people actually want it, and it's no longer seen as like you're not losing anything coming over from gas. Like we need the cultural version of that now, where it's like, yeah, I will willingly get rid of Amazon and Chinese manufactured products and divided political discourse just because the thing that they got going over there is awesome and I want to be a part of it. And so yeah, the task now is just actually building it with people. Like, what does that look like? I have ideas. I'm not here to say that I have answers, but I mean, we definitely need to figure it out sooner rather than later. But this all loops back to the core problem of, well, that's going to take like really strong self-sovereign people, right? A good collective needs good components. And so, yeah, one arm of it is facilitating that process in individuals so that they can then come and build this stuff together with us.
Well, that's fantastic, and yeah, there's so much overlap, I think, between what you're doing and what we're doing here. I'd love to work with you going forward to see how we can work together. And you know we've got we've relaunched a bunch of our psychotechnologies here on the forum, on the Discord. So we've got meditation every day. We've started doing a book club with Socrates as a symposium. Reading until something calls to us, reading aloud until something calls to us, and then talking about it. We're doing a book club on the wisdom of Hypatia. We've started John's Dialogos practice. We're trying to get the philosophical fellowship going again. We started doing the glass bead game on the forum, so that we're starting to experiment with all sorts of different psychotechnologies and trying to get people interested in them and doing them together. And I'm sure that coming up with new rituals as well is something we'd like to get into, and we've been playing around with. So I'm sure there's a lot of work we can do together in terms of creating this.
Yeah, absolutely. Like again, we need so many groups doing this stuff right now and sharing notes and just open sourcing fucking everything. 'Cause damn, we'll need a lot of us working in tandem to make this stuff happen. And I mean, it's possible. And again, this almost goes back to, I have this joke with some of the members of the High Existence team in our retreats. Like, what better game, honestly, is there to feel like you are so small and insignificant at a planet in just absolute on the precipice of crisis, and you just get to show up like the goddamn hero and like with a flick of the wrist just flip everything into this extremely beautiful world. Like, yeah, that's big stakes. That's going to be super hard, but damn, I'd go watch that movie for sure.
Absolutely. Well, this has been fantastic. I'd love to have you on again. There's so much more we could talk about. We've got a little over an hour now, and I want to respect your time, and I want to just thank you for being here, and thank all the people who listened. And if you're watching on YouTube and you've made it to this point, please give it a like, and of course subscribe. And if you're watching on YouTube, come check out our Discord. There's a link in the show notes for you to come. And if you're interested in what Eric is doing, we'll post his links as well. And so please check out his site. So highexistence.com, and I think your Twitter links to all your different sites as well. So
Yep.
You could look up. It's just sorry. Just give your Twitter for everyone.
Yeah, it's Eric Brown. Or if you go to ericbrown.digital, that's just like a one-page landing page that'll just take you wherever you want to go.
Well, that's fantastic. I think we're gonna. I hope to have a lot more contact in the future, because I think we're hopefully on similar trajectories here. So thank you so much for being here. It's been just a delightful conversation.
Yeah, this was fantastic, man. You guys are doing beautiful work. Thank you for y'all still hanging out with us in the online. It means a lot. It means a lot. And I mean, this is exactly what we need. So just, damn, run with it, sprint with it, make shit happen. Because it can feel like when you're working to yourself, it can feel like you're not going far. But my God, this is exactly what the world needs right now. Like, we need to take it super seriously and make it happen.
Absolutely, and doing it together, and there's lots of groups who are doing their own thing here, and yeah, one thing we'd like to do is bring them all together, and have everybody talking to each other, and working off each other and with each other, and see what we can do together. So thanks again.
Amen.
So thank you, Eric. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thanks everyone for listening, and stay tuned. There's more Q&As to come. We've got John coming back next Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern, and lots of other Q&As coming up. So stay tuned. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.